provoked to comment on these issues.
15 minutes after 10, we're crossing over to the University of Johannesburg and we bring you #Power Debate this morning. We're going to be drilling down into the details of what's happening in Gauteng, and standing by is my colleague Siki Mgabadele. Let's see whether we can get a nice, clear, crisp line all the way to Johannesburg, which is not too far from Powerhouse. We should have Siki on the line with us. Good morning, Siki.
Good morning, Eusebius. Have you got me loud and clear?
Loud and clear. You're on the air. We can hear you. How are things down there?
It's great. The atmosphere is a little bit muted at the moment, but with my experience, as you know, with debates, I'm sure it's going to get heated as soon as we start the discussion. It was interesting listening to you talking about whether or not you had decided who you're going to vote for. I think that's probably, the experience of a number of South Africans. I'm one of those. I haven't decided yet. I'll probably decide like you when I'm sitting in that particular booth on May the 7th or maybe the 6th, because we'll probably all be working, right, on May the 7th, Eusebius. All right, we're going to be running our debate, as Eusebius said, until about 11:30. And before we start, and I'll introduce my panelists in a moment, I'd like to just give you some ground rules. The ground rules are for the people assembled here with us at the hall at the University of Johannesburg. I like to run clean debates. So I'm going to, just to remind you that what this is about having a conversation about things that affect all of us as the citizens and residents of Gauteng. I'd like to give everybody a fair chance at a hearing. So what I'm going to ask is that everybody in the room, please, let's all carry ourselves with a level of dignity. Let's make sure that we give everybody a fair hearing. There's nothing that says we have to agree with each other, but at the very least, let's listen to each other. You will have an opportunity to have your voice heard and also to ask any questions that you might have of our panelists here this morning. And also, as Eusebius said, our PowerFM listeners can also call in. You can also tweet us. So when you do get an opportunity to ask your question, there are 2 microphones on either end of the room here. I'll ask you to go and stand there. Please ask your question as quickly as possible. No political speeches. 90 minutes is not long enough to hear long, rambling speeches. We ask you keep your questions short and sharp and tell us exactly who it is directed at. And for our PowerFM listeners, I'll tell you at which point you can call in on 0861 987 000. You can also tweet us. You can tweet at Sikim Gabadeli, at Eusebius, or at PowerFM 987. Right, today's debate is, of course, about the economic heartland of South Africa. That is Gauteng. As we know, it's common cause that this particular province is going to be quite hotly contested. I saw the same tweet that Eusebius was asking about, whether people asking why do we have the parties that we have. Well, we have the parties that we have because a number of the polls, whether you like polls or not, they're out there, they are used by people, show that these are the 3 main parties will be contesting this particular province, right? And if you are to believe recent polls, it seems that we may not have an outright majority, one party winning this particular province. Brian Hlongwa laughing there, of the ANC. But, well, I mean, I saw a recent one, I think it was earlier in January, that said that ANC support in Gauteng was at around 45%, the DA at about 22%, the EFF at around 7%, various other polls showing roughly similar percentages, some putting the ANC at above 50% as well. So we thought, let's invite all 3 parties to state their case for the province and to give you a chance to question them on their election promises. With us this morning, Brian Hlongwa of the African National Congress, Musi Maimane of the Democratic Alliance, and Advocate Dalim Mpofu of the EFF. We're also joined by Dr. Chris Landsberg, who is with the Politics and Diplomacy Department at the University of Johannesburg. Thank you so much to all of you for making the time to be with us today.
Much appreciated, and thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Siki.
This is also a mic test, right? Good to hear you. Thanks so much for being here. Brian, let me start with you. You chuckled at my statement that the recent polls have been showing us that there wouldn't be one party that has an outright majority. Why did you chuckle?
Well, it's because we've been reading about the obituary of the ANC for the past 103 years, and here we are, still strong and leading the people of South Africa. So polls are there for a purpose, but from where we sit, we have no doubt. I think it's useful to start with the reality. The reality is the following. In Gauteng, there are 73 seats in the legislature. The ANC occupies 47 as we speak now. The second largest party, which is the DA, has got 16. Well, the EFF is doing shadow boxing, they're untested. So I'm not sure what to say.
But your own internal polls reportedly said that you would only be getting around 45% support in the Gauteng province.
No, that's a misunderstanding. The reason why you have a campaign, before your campaign picks up, you test the mood to say where our people are. At a particular point, there were a number of issues that were not clear, and indeed, you could have as low as 46%. But as the election campaign takes off, as people begin to engage on policy issues, as they begin to look at the actual record of performance, things change. That's why we campaign. So I have no doubt in my mind that Gauteng is not up for grabs. The ANC will still be here.
After those reports, though, of that particular internal poll, we saw quite an intensification of the ANC's own campaigning in the province. So are you saying that these door-to-door campaigns are changing the minds of those voters who may not have been happy with the
Absolutely, without a doubt. We're not only relying on polls, we engage our people directly. There's no any party, in fact, in this country that has both the capacity and the infrastructure to engage directly with the voters. We are at the point where we are talking to voters at least for the third time now in each house. Firstly, we went in on a listening campaign. Secondly, having listened to what the people were saying, we developed our party manifesto with the input of the people of South Africa. Once the manifesto was developed, we went back to the people to say, are these the kinds of things you would want us to do? We accept where there are weaknesses, but we also celebrated where there are a lot of changes and improvements.
What's the most commonly asked question by voters of the ANC? Is it Nkandla?
Not at all, not at all. To Nkandlarize South African politics is a very poor attempt. There are a lot of fundamental issues that South Africa is faced with, particularly a province like Gauteng.
What are they asking you?
The key issues in Gauteng remain jobs and jobs and jobs. And we believe that we have a plan to address those key questions.
All right, let's bring in Musi Maimane into this conversation. According to the polls, Musi, you'll get under 30%. In the Gauteng province, which means you would need to partner with somebody at this table, right? And we're hearing all sorts of talk at the moment about coalition talks.
Sigi, thank you so much for having us. And to all the listeners of PowerFM, it's really good to be on this platform. One of the things that I find exciting, and maybe just to respond a bit to what polling is indicating, first of all, is that it's without doubt that the ANC has consistently tracked below 50%. That fact we know. It can't be debated. I think to suggest that it is higher than that would be misleading people. If you consider even the local government elections, it doesn't help us to go to 2009. In 2009, we didn't have tolling. We didn't have issues that have really frustrated people of Gauteng, and the people of Gauteng are saying they're ready for change. And so what is vital to accept here is the fact that when you look at even our own internal data, when you go out on the streets, as I have been, I have traveled 37,000 kilometers of this province. I know I've been to as many houses as possible. I've shaken thousands and tens of thousands of hands. People realize the fact that their prospects of being able to find work is diminishing, and therefore they need a different plan. So the issue of being Gauteng is great, it's well contested, and that's where we're at. My job now is to make sure that we maximize our poll. I think
you're not answering my question.
The stat about 30% is a stat that probably came out a few months ago, and I think when I reflect even today, our polls are indicating a growth beyond that. We're showing high numbers. And
what is the number? Is it above 50%?
Well, not at this stage, but we've got 2 weeks to go before an election campaign. Your question about whether or not there's a prospect of coalitions, I don't want to get into that, because coalitions are only a function of what happens after the election. My main job now is to maximize every possible DA voters, every person who thinks that the DA has a credible alternative to Gauteng, every person who wants to come out and vote, and I think we'll do very well.
All right. Advocate Dalimpofu. The EFF says it's a government in waiting, but that's not what the polls are indicating.
Yeah, well, Siki, let me just tell you about the polls. The polls do not go to the kinds of places we go to. They do not go to the poorest of the poor in the squatter camps in Stretla, in Marikana, near Tsakane, in Elias Mutsoledi, in Soweto, in Stoffel Park, in Mamelodi, and all the places that we frequent, where we addressed more than 5,000 people a day. Only yesterday, until the early evening, we were addressing about 6,000 people in Amanskral. Who waited there until we came, even though we were delayed. Because the people are very enthusiastic about our message. Excuse me. The point of the matter is that at least Brian is honest by accepting that their own polls suggest that they're not going to have a 50% win.
He says that's changing now.
Well,
yeah.
No, he's not even saying that. I think he's even more honest. He's saying that they're going to try to change it. Well, I can tell him that, that it's, if he thinks the other parties are just waiting for them to try and pass the 50% mark, then he must think again. Because we are making serious inroads and growing our support base. So, you can only grow if you kind of arrest the other parties not to grow as well. But if we're growing as rapidly as we are growing, then there's no chance for them to get to win this province. So I think they must just reconcile themselves with that reality. Of course, pre-election posturing must suggest that they are buoyant and confident, but deep down they know that the people of Gauteng have demonstrated on many occasions the booing incidents that have happened in this province, what is happening when we meet the people face to face about the issues. And the issues are, he's quite right, unemployment, housing, sanitation, health, those are the kinds of issues that we're getting on our door-to-door campaign.
On your own door-to-door. All right, but again, you would need to partner with somebody. Are you at least willing to tell us who you would be in talks with? Are you in talks with Musi Maimane next to you?
No, absolutely not. I think that that issue needs to be put to bed once and for all. We're not in any coalition talks with anybody because we believe that it would be presumptuous and premature to talk coalitions. Coalitions are actually forced by the electorate. You must remember, it is the electorate that will say no party in this place deserves more than 50%. And so it's only based on the results. It's only the results that can say who you speak to, if anybody. As far as we're concerned, our position is very clear. One, it is that we will only talk to people who will accept the fundamentals of our policy, namely fundamental but very fundamental economic transformation. Otherwise, we can't even talk, we can't even say hello to somebody who doesn't agree with that. Yeah. The second thing is that we think that logically, if you look at the policy positions, the parties that really should go to bed together, the DA and the ANC, because they both agree on the NDP, and we are fundamentally opposed on the NDP to the NDP.
All right, let's bring Chris into this conversation. What do you make of what's been said, Chris?
I thought you were going to ask me a specific question, but then again, I'm a loyal and faithful member of UJ. Okay. So let me just get that. So I've got some supporters here. That's good. To the left of them, Musi, I hope you noticed. On a serious note, let me make two observations. There's something fundamental that's happening in our society that should both excite us and force us to do some introspection. What excites us, what should excite us, and what is exciting me about this election, none of the parties here this morning referred to, it might be early days or early times in the debate, referred to democracy or the fact that democracy is under threat. Now, I'm not suggesting that they don't have concerns about the quality of democracy, I think it's very good that democracy and its health and quality does not feature prominently, because maybe we are consolidating as a democracy.
Yeah.
Let me be the first to say, without being a doomsayer, that the lack of violence has been a welcome surprise for me, and long may it continue, and we certainly hope it continues during and after the election. So I want to put the point. So what is interesting about today's debate is, if polls are anything to go by, but then again, Siki, we don't have long to wait for the outcome, is that issues are becoming the order of the day.
Yeah.
Prominent socio-economic issues. And I wish to state unequivocally, that's the soft underbelly of South Africa, right? Inequality, poverty. What I find interesting about the EFF's manifesto is the prominence of the race issue, and how they single out how black people are still living in squalor in the country. Yet the same EFF says we need to be a society that lives in social cohesion, a unified society, racially, and so on.
But are those two things mutually exclusive?
No, they're not mutually exclusive, and that's why I'm saying what is refreshing is that somebody can put the race question so frontally, and yet that party must answer to me, how do you on the one hand speak so loudly for one constituency, and yet you also promise that you're going to unite South Africa? Then finally, before Dali responds, then finally there's an undertone here about the state.
Yeah.
I wish to put it to the ANC that for them the issue is their capacity to manage this state.
Okay.
Even in this province. For the DA, I would ask the question, don't you rely too much on market forces to address our problems at the expense of the state? And to the EF, I will say, aren't you placing too much emphasis on the state as the be-all and end-all at the expense of private sector and economic forces?
All right, I'm going to give you a chance to answer all of those questions in a moment. I'm also going to give you a chance to ask certain questions as well. We will be going into issues of service delivery. We'll be going into issues of transportation and the ever-controversial e-tolls. We'll talk about healthcare in our province, and we're going to also be talking very specifically about the issue of jobs and unemployment. That's still to come in this particular debate, but I'll be giving you a chance to ask your questions. So remember, make your way and stand in front of the microphone. Give us your first name, who your question is directed at as well. Dali, let's respond.
Yes. Well, your question to Chris actually covers what I was going to say. You see, the problem with South Africans is that sometimes we overemphasize one thing at the expense of another, or treat things as if they are mutually exclusive. The issue of national reconciliation and social cohesion can never be seen as mutually exclusive, from the fact that historically anybody who is a true South African cannot deny that the problems we are faced with now did not start in 1994. They started in 1652, and some of them started in 1913 with the Land Act, and 1950 with the Group Areas Act, and so on. And those were deliberate, but very deliberate measures to exclude African people.
Yeah.
So, and that is why you find service delivery protests now in the black areas. Have you ever found a service delivery protest in Sandton? No. So we mustn't be too nice and deny what is happening in this country. White people must know that they were privileged by law, by a number of wars and all sorts of things. But what we're saying at the same time is that the alleviation of the plight of the poor is in the long-term interest of the rich and white people. The stability, the instability that will result if we do not address the problems of the poorest will affect all of us, and the upper classes in particular.
And very, very briefly, the question of excluding or over-reliance on the state, I think was the question from
Yes.
Chris.
Again, I mean, it's a fallacy to think that a problem that has been created over centuries by state intervention of the highest order, where they were even almost legislating the air that you breathe. And you think that that is going to be suddenly resolved by the so-called invisible hand of the market. This problem of South Africa is structural, it's entrenched, and it can only be resolved by state intervention, decisive state intervention, in favor of the poor, deliberately, without making excuses or without being too nice about it. It must be in favor of the poor at the expense of the rich.
Yeah. I mean, I think sometimes when we talk about markets and private citizens, we can get those terms slightly conflated. Let me talk about freedom. Let me talk about true freedom. When we talk about true freedom, it's when a South African can stand up and say, I'm a custodian of shares of an enterprise. I have a title deed that empowers me to grow. That's freedom. That's giving people access into the economic ladder. Not saying the state must be custodians of that or owners of that, so that we are saying not to the detriment. The state has a crucial role to play. Its role in intervening, in creating an enabling environment, building the relevant infrastructure, putting the ICT infrastructure, so that South Africans can take up their small businesses and begin to grow. When we talk about employment, you asked a very crucial question, which is to say, have I got an over-reliance on market forces? Well, let's look at South Africa's GDP, or at least economic output in the last year. If you look at the third quarter of last year, 70% of the jobs that were added into the economy, in fact, came from the Western Cape. I love the criticism that often comes to say, but where the DA governs, the jobs come from the private sector. It is precisely because we create the enabling environment to say, let people start their small businesses, let people have title deeds, let them be custodians of the land and shares, and be able to be empowered to create the relevant business structures that we need so we can create a much fuller picture of employment. If you contrast provinces, come to Gauteng, in Premier Nomvula Mokonyane's term of office, an additional over 480,000 people have lost employment. In the same environment, when you contrast that vis-a-vis in the government of the Western Cape, we can take the unemployment record and reduce it right down to 22. It's not perfect, it's not great, we are working towards it, but it indicates the fact that when you empower people to start their businesses, when you make it possible with the right education system to say people can start their small businesses, have their title deeds, you create an environment.
So you're saying the role of the state is to create an enabling environment for people to thrive.
All economies globally are mixed economies. It's not to the detriment of the other, but the state must know its job, not to try and do the job of the market.
Brian?
Thank you, Siki. I think it would be very useful that we deal with actual facts. You know, this fallacy, the DA poster boys go around saying things that are not factual. Here are the facts. Gauteng is the center of the South African economy. It contributes at least up to 36% to the GDP. If you want to understand the size of the economy of Gauteng, it's actually equal to the Western Cape, the Northern Cape, Free State, Mpumalanga, Northwest combined. Okay? Now wait. I did not interrupt you. Next. And two, don't be intellectually dishonest. The facts are, in Gauteng we have 4.8 million people with jobs, as compared to the Western Cape, which is 2 million jobs. Secondly, in terms of economic growth, Gauteng is ranking high at 3.6% per annum, followed by KwaZulu-Natal at 3.4, DA at 3.38. If anything, the truth is, if you compare 2004 to 2009, when the ANC was governing Western Cape, the economic growth per annum was higher in the Western Cape. The opposite happened.
Yeah, let him finish, let him finish.
Let me
finish.
Don't be hot under the collar. The fact of the matter is, since 2009, when the DA came in, the opposite have happened. Out of all job opportunities that have been created by the Western Cape economy, the demographics are 53.5% of the population is colored, followed by 28.5%, which is African, white 17.5%. But the opportunities are going to who? 61% is white people. Why are people coming to Gauteng? Gauteng is a third of the population of South Africa. Opportunities are here for jobs, for training, because this is where South Africans feel they're at home, as opposed to the Western Cape. What is happening is the pattern, the trends in terms of size. 220,000 white people have migrated to the Western Cape. The Western Cape is the lagger of the old economy. Gauteng attracts all people of this country. The economy is growing, so there's no way you can compare that Spaza economy, which is run in the Western Cape, with Gauteng.
All right, Brian, I'm going to ask you to pause there. I will give you a chance, Mercy, but I would like us to actually give our audience a chance. Pause on that. We're coming back to the economy, and that's fine. You can challenge the misinformation when I come to you, which I will do. All right, I'm going to give you a chance. Just make a note of what you need to say on this particular point. I'm going to go to our studios in Houghton, catch up with Eusebius, get some calls, read some tweets, and also give you a chance. So if you want to make a point, please make your way to one of the microphones in the front, and I will come to you as soon as I can. Eusebius in Houghton. Okay, I'm not sure if Eusebius can actually hear me. While we try and figure that out, let's find out from the room here if we've got any specific questions for our three panelists today. You're listening to Power 98.7, bringing you the Power Debate. If you'd like to participate via Twitter, the hashtag is Power Debate. You can also tweet me at Sikim Gabadeli or at Eusebius or at PowerFM 987. You can call in to the studio on 0861 987 000. Participating in our debate today, Brian Hlongwa of the ANC, Musi Maimane of the DA, and Advocate Dalimbofu of the Economic Freedom Fighters. And let's take some questions from the University of Johannesburg. What is your name, sir, and who's your question for?
My name is Debo Mukwena. My question is directed to Musi. The prominent tendency of the DA is to deny. I'm from the Val in Meerton. The DA, when it was campaigning on the last elections, promised the black people there that they must vote for DA and then they'll provide houses. Fortunately, they did provide the houses. He just mentioned that they push for people to get title deeds and to be custodians of the land. A year later, white African people who owned the land came and evicted those people. The ANC came of Sidibeng to rescue the people. So I want to know from Musi, what is the definition of them being there for the people? How do they serve? And when they claim that they're in charge of Midval, is being in charge misleading people and saying that they can they fight for people to have title deeds.
All right, thank you. A reminder, no political speeches. Your question, please. Your question, sir.
My name is David Bokhosing. My question is directed to Mr. Hlongwa. Mr. Hlongwa, seemingly you are the premier candidate for Gauteng province. What have you done to create opportunities for young upcoming entrepreneurs? Because of most of us, 95% of the youth is not working in South Africa, in Gauteng, basically.
All right. Thank you. That's David asking a specific question to Brian. Musi, let me first give you a chance to respond to what Brian said earlier, and then could you also answer this question about your definition of serving the people?
Sure. You know, it's hard when you're at the university because you at least have to have some basic understanding of economics. And it's hard because then what you start saying is that in a GDP output of Gauteng, which historically through a mining belt has benefited through infrastructure rollout, of course Gauteng must have the largest economic output. There's no debate about that. I don't know where that debate must emerge from. If you accept the fact that the two growing economies between the Western Cape and KZN are in fact creeping up to Gauteng and starting to make gains, is an indictment against Gauteng. It should be leading far more than it is now, but it's not. And in fact, when you look at the levels of unemployment, Gauteng is leading in that score. When you look at the levels of inequality, Johannesburg is leading in that score. So this idea of the fact that no, other economies are Spaza economies is misleading because in fact those economies are growing and are catching up in GDP proportions to Gauteng. Now, let me highlight the fact that when you look at the issues of how you create jobs, etc., and you come back here, you start to see very quite clearly that the issue of the economy in South Africa and where it is, of course we agree that the structures of the economy is not right. We must be able to empower more South Africans to be custodians of their own. So when you talk about caring for people, I have argued quite clearly, we deliver more houses than any other province. We deliver more title deeds than any other province. In fact, that's the presidency report on that score. Because we believe fundamentally that a job is the best way out of poverty. So give people an opportunity to be able to be custodians of their own land, to be custodians of their own economy, and they can become participants in that.
Can I ask you a question about that? Why is it then that the Western Cape, in recent surveys, seems to be even outpacing Gauteng in terms of service delivery protests, if there's all this delivery in the Western Cape?
Understand the fact that when you look at service delivery protests, particularly in the Western Cape, I mean, there's a whole narrative around service deliveries. But if we talk about service delivery as a function of delivery of service, on all three indicators, whether it be water, whether it be electricity, whether it be sanitation, the Western Cape is in the late 90s when it comes to that delivery. It's not a perfect story. It's a story that is in progress. Now, when you follow some of the service delivery protests, they were started by members of the ANC who started throwing poo at airports, at government buildings, which I don't know why there's no one from the ANC who said that is not right. Because when you understand the fact that the access to sanitation, and it's motivated by ANC people who refuse to accept that they lost in the Western Cape, and in fact, in the main, that they should contest elections in a legitimate, in a sober manner, rather than delivering poo to people of South Africa. But let me also highlight, I want to highlight.
I'll give you a chance just very briefly, because I want to get a response very quickly from you, and then get Brian to answer the question. Yeah?
South Africa is a story that has its historical narrative. And it's hard. I don't want to say the lives of the people in Khayelitsha are perfect. I don't want to say the lives of the people in Langa are perfect. All I can say is that government is working hard to intervene in that area. So, for example, we've built a world-class hospital in Khayelitsha. We've put another world-class hospital in Langa. Just to simply say, we've got to work the government resources within the space that you have to deliver to South Africans. It's a journey that we are on, but we are proving a governance model that is not riddled with corruption, that seeks to deliver.
All right, very quickly, because I need to go to Brian.
You see, the problem with the two parties on my right here is that, you know, they are missing the fundamentals. The fundamentals are this: we are Africans. As Africans, our values of Ubuntu say that you are because I am. So you cannot come here and gloat about all sorts of Western Cape achievements when there are people who do not have toilets, when there are people who are provided by the same DA government with open toilets. What is that? When the dignity of the people is assaulted to such an extent that they even do the indignified act of throwing poo at that government. That shows the deep levels of dissatisfaction and unequal treatment of the citizens of the Western Cape itself. So that is what we're saying. What we're saying is that ideologically, you must ideologically commit to resolving the problems of the poorest of the poor. Because if one of us does not have a toilet, all of us do not have a toilet. If one of us do not have a roof over your head, then all of us do not have. Unless if you believe in this mumbo jumbo that you must first create for the rich few, and then somehow by some magic it's going to trickle down to the poor. You need to have deliberate policies. And I'm sorry, Chris. Just one little point.
One point and one sentence.
One sentence. If we accept that we live in the most unequal society, and if we also accept that Gauteng, in that most unequal society, Gauteng is the most unequal, then it means we're living in the most unequal area by square meter in the world. So that must tell you the serious problems and the need for intervention.
Those were five sentences. Chris?
First off,
let me try and be brief. You see, this beauty contest between the Western Cape and Gauteng is no accident, by the way. It's because in one, you have the only province in the country that is not run by the ANC, right? That's why there's so much emphasis on that one. I tell you what the elephant in the room is for today. What makes this province so significant, it is, again, according to polls, not really a pollster.
I'm also not a fan, but okay.
But it is the most contested province. So let me throw out a scenario there that all three our candidates here can respond to. If the ANC does worse than it did in the previous election, I suggest to you it's going to heighten tensions and divisions in the ANC with serious ramifications. If the ANC, unfortunately for them, if performs with a percentage under 50, then I don't think Dali or Muzi must just dismiss your question about coalition talk. Because the reality is the vision of the DA, put in very simple terms, is to turn South Africa, like Germany, like the United Kingdom, like the United States, into a two-party dominant state. In other words, the ANC, the big gorilla in sort of just expressionist terms, and what it therefore means, the DA has to swallow up everybody else. Can they respond to this thing? Can the ANC respond to the possibility of the ramifications if they perform poorer than the last election? And you can't duck and dive the coalition question.
All right. First, Brian, can you please answer David's question before you deal with that question about the ramifications for the ANC?
No, thank you, Siki. David raised a very critical question, which confirms what I said earlier on, that one of the key challenges that it's facing the people of South Africa in general and Gauteng in particular is the issue of ensuring that we create enough jobs. So the first thing that we'll have to address is the issue of, on the one hand, an economy that is growing, though far below the population growth. Because the economy is growing, but it's not growing enough to be able to absorb entrance into the labor markets. So the first problem that you must address in Gauteng is to deal with the mismatch between available job opportunities and available skills. So the first issue we must deal with fundamentally is education. And of course, Gauteng, as you know, is the learning center of the continent. We're the only province with 6 universities, 8 FET colleges, and growing. Now, if you look at our interventions, just in 2013 alone, we now have 900,000 young people who are enrolled in public universities. If you look at the figure for FET colleges, in 2010 there were 350,000. There's 650,000 young people getting into vocational and technical training, because that's how we are going to grow the economy. Secondly, the ANC has put a clear plan in place through infrastructure development to ensure that we're able to have the necessary artisans that we need, which would create the jobs that Bokhodzi is talking about. But in the short term, there are a number of interventions that have happened. The expanded public works program is not a permanent solution, but it's to say, in the short term, given our tragic past, you do have people who don't have any other skill, who will have to be given an opportunity first to acquire some skill, understand what it means to be employed, become an intern, get mentorship, study. And I don't want to lie to anybody. In the ANC, we believe you need skills. We need skilled people. Because the opportunities that are available in Gauteng, we are leading in all major sectors except 2, agriculture and mining. But any other sector of the economy, Gauteng is leading, but it needs skills.
But so is the expanded public works program, though, the way to go? Because let me tell you the perception of what that particular program is. It is of people who go and dig a hole, and then fill it, and then dig it, and then fill it. How is that creating
Here's the point,
skills?
Siki. Here's the point. The point is, it's only now, because of the interventions that the ANC-led government has made in the past 20 years. And that is to lay a solid foundation in terms of education and skills. Because the fact of the matter is, you had South Africans here who never had an opportunity to go to school, who possess no any other skill other than their own labor. What are you going to do about those people? I'm not going to condemn them. And to a person who's unemployed, 100 rands in their pocket per day makes a difference. It's a choice between bread on the table or no bread at all. So that's why I'm saying, and I concede, it's not a permanent solution. but it's a stopgap measure.
Okay.
The long term is to deal with education.
Can you please respond
Yes.
to Chris's question? I'll come to you,
Yeah.
Musi. Please respond to Chris's question, because
Yes.
I do have to move on, and
Yes.
we've got 7 minutes to the news. So we have to be
There
quite
is
brief now.
absolutely no doubt, Chris, that the issues of good governance are a big challenge. And particularly in a province like Gauteng, you need, and I think we have a record that speaks for itself in terms of good governance. And what do we mean by good governance? Firstly, you need to ensure that we have a government that is based on the will of the people and responds to the needs of the people. Secondly, a government that is accountable to the people of this province. And I have no doubt in my mind that Gauteng, when it comes to that, we are a leading light. The people of Gauteng are one of the most sophisticated voters. The last point, Siki, that we must deal with, a point was raised which Musi ducked about Midvaal. Remember, where the DA runs, by design, this was the heartland of Afrikaner conservatism. The only black township that was built in 1994 by the ANC is called Stelo. Otherwise, DA wants to keep it white, hence the interventions we have made. They're going to be integrated with Mfuleni and to ensure that we share with the people of it. Thank you very much.
Musi?
Thank you, Siki. I mean, I did want to critically respond to that question, and I spoke about the delivery of housing, which I'm glad you acknowledge, that it was a DA government. I think you must also not forget the fact that when you look at unemployment levels at Midvaal, they are the lowest right through the province, showing that when you run a good government, people are able to find jobs, which is the need of the people of South Africa. I think sometimes we like to box people into certain corners. We understand that if the crisis is employment, unemployment at Midvaal is the lowest in contrast to any other municipality. The municipality next door in Mfuleni is the worst performing municipality, and Brian wouldn't accept that in the provincial report. Now, let me also highlight, in answer to some of the key questions here, is that, you know, when Brian talks about EPWP jobs, for once, I think that's consistent and that's honest, because at least it comes from an organization that is committed to increasing the size of the state. So at least from a policy space, it fits in well. We accept that EPWP must be something that is used. Here's the key issue here. When we talk about infrastructure rollout, there was a commitment to building youth hubs here in Gauteng, or centers where people can go. Only one has been built in the 20-year period. So when we talk about stimulating of small businesses, that's why we, on a policy space, say, in fact, what you need to do is put government buildings, avail them for innovative buildings, or innovating businesses, so that they can rent them out and run small businesses. What you also need is to create one-stop centers where people can come and register their businesses, be able to be innovative around it. When we talk about ICT rollout, we must be able to put South Africans, whether they're in school, wherever, into a space where they can be global citizens. That's the Gauteng dream of being able to create employment. Now,
right,
in answer
I need you
to this
to respond
question,
to
I want to
this
respond to
question.
that question. The issue of the realignment of politics is something that we've been championing. So you asked me a question about whether or not, there are principles that guide realignment. It's not my dream and to say that we must just be a two-party state. Of course, I accept the principle of multi-party democracy. But what I don't want to accept is our polity being a polity of saying, if you are black, you vote for this party. If you are white, you vote for that party. What we must do is realign politics by being able to build principles of redress, understanding our historical context, by being able to build principles of saying, how do we defend the Constitution? How do we act in a non-racial manner? And then more vitally, how do we make sure that we professionalize the state? On those principles, you can then say parties who agree on that must come together, not to the detriment of every other voice.
Will the DA be the epicenter of such a new, strong coalition?
We've certainly been championing that message, and it's something that we want to work towards, because we've made the invitation open to his mind. It's not a conversation about coalitions or anything like that. It's a conversation about saying, if we agree on principles, then it makes sense for us to be together in order to build a diverse body polity for South Africans.
All right, very quickly, Musi. Musi, here's a question for you, and it's very quickly on Twitter. I will come to you, darling. I will come to you. I haven't forgotten that you were there. Here's a question while we're still on Musi from George on Twitter. What's the DA's stance on nationalization and expropriation of land?
We've taken, when it comes to the land reform policy, we are supportive of the principle of willing buyer, willing seller, actually.
The one that's everyone tells us is not working.
Well, equally so, there are processes around that issue that have made it to fail, that are perhaps maybe different to that. We don't believe in expropriation of land without compensation. We don't support that policy. On the second one is that nationalization in the main has, in fact, if you go to nations that have nationalized their resources, you often found the economic output of that resources diminishes progressively, which in fact hinders economic growth. What we're arguing is the fact that, wait, instead of talking about nationalization by saying, let the state be the custodians of the wealth, rather what we are saying is that when we talk about the shares, even at Goldfields, why did they go to one individual in Balekambeta? Why couldn't the miners that work in the mine own each and every share that comes out of that place? That's transformation. That says people own it, and that's what keeps the economic output of that asset still in the gold.
All right, Daddy, I'm going to give you a chance. Let me do this. Either I'd give you a chance now and you only have 30 seconds, or I'd give you a chance after the break and you have a little bit more time. Let me be fair.
When I have to
but that's why I'm saying,
so
rather let's pause now because I've got to go to news, and then you've got a little bit more time after the news at 11 o'clock. And we're going to continue our conversation. Do call. We're going to take some calls actually after the news at 11. The number to dial, 0861 987 000. We'll also take some more questions from our audience here at the University of Johannesburg. You're listening to the Power Debate on Power Talk with Eusebius Makeza. I'm in here helping you with this particular debate from the University of Johannesburg. It's 11 o'clock.
Okay, the line a little bit unclear. I can hear you vaguely, but let's see whether we can get Timothy on the line before I speak to you again. Timothy is all the way in Cape Town, Siki, and we've been listening to, of course, the focus down there about jobs. But one of the things that have been the tactics used by Musi have been to use Cape Town as the ultimate template in the Gauteng strategy. Pull out that hunk of a man in Tim Harris and then say, we've got an amazing story to tell about Cape Town. How's it, Timothy?
Good evening,
Lekker soos 'n cracker. You want to speak directly here in our town hall debate to Musi Maimane. What do you have to say to him, Timothy?
I actually want to ask Musi, the beautiful story they're talking about in Cape Town, because I'm in Delft, Cape Town, just a few minutes away from Khayelitsha in Nyanga. When you check Cape Town, it's racially divided. When you check Cape Town, it's the most exploitative province in the whole country. Why I'm saying this? Because they're using cheap labor in most companies. That is why he says they're creating job opportunities. They're not creating secured and reliable jobs, but they're creating jobs. When people are leaving those jobs, they have got nothing after that, because most of the companies are dominated by labor brokers. Number two, the issue of toilets and pota-potas. I will be honest, the DA won't approach the issue of a land which will solve these issues of pota-potas and all this issue of toilets, because the land on itself is a package. It will easily solve the issue of service delivery on housing and toilets. That is why I'm waiting so eagerly for EFF, because they are talking to us as black people. DA actually is not talking to any black person. Okay. He's talking to those elites, white, and Elizabeth, I'll be honest. I'm convinced why they cannot approach the issue of a land radically is because I believe that the people who are funding them are the ones who are owning the land.
Okay, we're going to leave it there, Timothy. I'm going to come back to you, Siki. Yes. So just to say, basically, before I leave it and we listen more to what's going on there at UJ, that service delivery has been a big theme on the Power Talk timeline here in the studio. And you can hear Timothy there giving a summary of some of the concerns. So two quick questions from me that I'm looking forward to over the next 15 minutes is how Musi will respond to that. The ANC hasn't been very good at examining very closely the DA's record in government in the Western Cape. It's not as great on the Cape Flats as it would be if you're in the southern suburbs. And then a question to the ANC, though, in turn, is that many colored voters down there are not necessarily, all that much in love with the party. What is the tactics that they will use to try and upset the way in which the DA is selling itself to the people of Gauteng? Because one of their tactics have been to say, in places where we do govern, we do an amazing amazing job. Let's do the same in Gauteng. Back to you, Siki.
Thanks to Eusebius. We'll be crossing back, to, of course, to Eusebius at 11:30. Now, before I get a response to Timothy's question from Musi, Dali, let me give you a chance to make the point you wanted to make just ahead of the news.
Thank you very much, Siki. I just want to make, I think, 3 quick points. The first one is that it is, utterly disingenuous to use this Western Cape example as Timothy the caller has just said. And he has correctly said, if you don't address the land issue, all of these things become subsidiary. But it is, what takes the cake is to use Mid-Val. I mean, really, to say the unemployment rate in Mid-Val is lowest, and it's like saying the unemployment rate among white people in South Africa is the lowest. Whereas my 10-year-old child would say to that, duh, which happens to be spelled D-A, Because, I mean, it's like it's stating the obvious. You can't showcase the very historical injustice of the past as your success. Second point is that, you see, the consensus between the DA and the ANC on the NDP is what is worrying the most. Because the facts are that the NDP itself says that you require a 5.4% growth rate to achieve its own objectives, which are very mediocre indeed. So currently the economy is growing at 1.9. So it's not going to happen what these two parties agree on. The NDP says that employment between 2010 and now should have gone from 25% to 20%. It hasn't done so. It's still stuck at 25%. It says 16 million people should have been employed by 2015, which is next year. Only about 1 million people have been employed. So the plan that these parties are following is doomed to fail. It is just not going to happen. The third, so we need a radical shift from the economic blueprint that they both believe in, because it's not going to happen. Lastly, to Chris's point, you see, once again, if there are going to be any coalitions, I agree that in 10, 20 years' time, maybe, there will be 2 blocks of politics, irrespective of the number of parties. But those parties will be ideologically defined. It will be a block on the left, which hopefully will be around the EFF, the Workers' Party that Nomsa is talking about, and those kinds of organizations. That's why we've been talking to an array of organizations on the left. And then on the right will be a new coalition between the DA and the ANC around, no, it's not a joke, centered around the outlook that they agree on, which is the NDP. Now, that is what, and it will be great because the voters of this country, the voters will then have a choice as to whether the free market will solve the historical problems or the state. And that is as simple as all that. They agree on the willing buyer, willing seller. They agree on all sorts of things. I mean, Brian cannot come and tell us that. He can't come here and say that we need skills. He can't be telling us what we need. It's 20 years. What did they do in the past 20 years? They did nothing to create a situation for where employment can be increased.
Lucy, please respond to Timothy. And then I'm going to take 2 questions from the floor, if you can make your ways to the microphones. Musi?
I want to, just as Advocate Mbofu has just put out to say, no. The Mid-Val issue is not a story that you can claim. I want to highlight the fact that municipalities have their own reporting mechanism. When you look at the attraction of investment even in Mid-Val, it is higher in the same region of Lekwa, in the same region of Mfuleni and the municipal output. The facts remain is that at least at one level, you must be able to take a municipality, measure its own output, and decide whether that municipality is functional or not. I'm not sure why we're not talking about the extreme levels of corruption even in Mfumuleli, the 6 billion rands that gets wasted even here in Gauteng. Those are legitimate questions that we must be putting on the table.
But isn't the point that he's making, correct me if I'm misquoting you or misrepresenting you, Dali, but isn't the point that he's making that Mid-Val already was 100 steps ahead of any other municipality by virtue of the history of this country?
But there are many other instances that are the same. The point that you're trying to do is that when you inherit a municipality with its imperfections, with our historical imbalances, you then have to take decisive action, put strong leadership, and make sure that that economy can grow, that economy can deliver the outputs that it can. I'm talking about investment that emerged as an output of putting in a different government in that place. That's the point I'm trying to make. And so And so we must accept the fact that when you look at the broad pie of Gauteng, I can take you to municipalities in the far West Rand, where investment output is not so good. And in fact, the delivery of services is worse. These are municipalities that have been under the ANC. You can go to Bekkersdal and look at the communities there and realize the fact that South Africans who are poor are sitting and realizing the fact that they have no hope under the ANC, and that's why they are desperate for change.
Okay.
Now,
very briefly, because I've got to take some calls and I've got to give Brian
I think
a
it's
chance
important to feel the pain of people who are working in labor conditions that are not good. I feel it. I think what the caller Timothy highlights about abuse that takes place in the private sector, I'm not supportive of that. I'm not supportive of labor regimes that seek to abuse people. I'm not supportive of that at all. And so I think we must understand that where there's a private sector mismanagement, we've been quick to highlight that. I can take you to cases where we've even taken on companies like MTN and many others. Because the issue here is that if there's abuse of labor, it cannot be acceptable at any level.
What about his central question about Cape Town being racially divided?
Our history as South Africans has delivered to us a place. Let's not forget that the ANC was in government before the DA, that these same challenges had existed well under the ANC government. What we've done to be able to address these issues is to look at a macro report. I don't want to give you our own fact sheet. I want to look at what the presidency report puts on the table, which is to say that 70% of the Western Cape's budget is spent in communities that are poor. This is the higher than when the ANC was in power. When you look at transformation, even in terms of workforces, we've had to take and say to ourselves, in 76% of the people who work with the Western Cape government now, who work in there, are now from black South Africans. It's an indicator of the fact that when you take reports and you analyze them, you say, what has the Western Cape government done with the inherited situation that they got from the ANC, where no department got clean audits, where in fact the business done with black South Africans was lower than what it is now.
Okay.
You then take it on and you say, you are working to deliver basic services to South Africans and you are investing disproportionately in black communities.
All right, Brian? And I need you to respond very quickly, otherwise the people here are going to kill me. Eusebia says Cape Town colored voters are not in love with the ANC, and what are you going to do about that?
No, that's a generalization. Coloreds, Africans, whites, they're not homogeneous, so we can't generalize. The fact of the matter is the following, Siki. And I think I want to deal with the first point that Dali raised. The EFF, they're doing shadow boxing. They've never been in government at all. So it's easy for them to say 5% is nonsense, almost as if an economy grow by proclamation. All you must say is, I want 20% economic growth. Voila, it happens. It doesn't happen like that, okay? So the issues we're dealing with about the NTP in our case is the framework within which our broader policies are located. Being the new growth path on how to deal with the issues of jobs. B, the National Infrastructure Plan, which I think is the most ambitious and the most practical. There's never been a plan in this country in the past 30 years that compares to what the ANC has done in 20 years. Just building 2 universities, 12 HET colleges, 2 power plants. In fact, Medupi being the 5th largest in the world is happening under the ANC government. Now, these are people who understand what it means to govern, what it means to manage a real economy. And if we're just to talk about ideology, Dali knows, I mean, I'm the head of political education. I can give him a class or 2 at no cost, right? Now, economics has to do with a number of things. It's not just the issues of ownership, which are important. It's about the issues of production. It's about issues of distribution. And in our case here, we do agree on one thing, that we need to fundamentally change the structure of the economy. We need to ensure that there's economic distribution. But to think that in South Africa today, in this modern day and age, you can just tell South Africans, I'm going to take your land, without any compensation.
You've had 20 years, though, Brian. What have you been doing? What do you mean we need
South Africa
to transform the economy?
Siki, South Africa is a better place today than it was in 1994. To expect, to expect that the damage that took place over 350 years must be fixed in 20 years. It's being disingenuous.
But I understand that. And,
Right?
I understand that, first of all, and I think very few people, probably in this room or anyone listening to us right now, would disagree that South Africa is much better than what it was in 1994. But again, when we listen to politicians, and particularly politicians who are in government, telling us we need to, ne? Not we are, we need to. Who's we?
But in
and
our
when
case,
why are we still needing to do
But
something?
in our case, we have a real plan on the table. Here's a fact. You understand the economy. In 1994, there were only about 330,000 people who could be classified as middle class. As I speak to you, on the basis of what the ANC has done over the past 20 years, 4.5 million people, Africans, are now part of the middle class. That's a real growth. It's tremendous. Give me any other comparative analysis from any other country. The last point, this thing that, you know, the Western Cape and Midvaal is an exclusive thing, they grow the economy, is not true. In Midvaal, the two major investments, one being Heineken, the other one being Ferrero Rocher, which is a chocolate factory, is the government of the ANC in Gauteng that has made that investment. Similarly,
We don't, okay.
No, the point that I'm making is that trade and industry and foreign policy are not directed by provinces. The national government, in this country has been doing that.
Okay.
So,
let's be governable, please. Let's be governable. I have to take the questions. After we've taken the two questions, I want you to answer the questions and at the same time give me your final closing comments. Okay. Chris, I'll wrap up with you. Let's start on the side of the room.
Thank you. My name is Anda Tabete. I'm a student here at UJ. Quickly, I just want to ask two questions to Maimane and to the ANC representative. Why is it that in Gauteng, most of the time in door-to-doors, if we believe that the DA is the racial championing organization, why is it that in Gauteng we always see black people doing door-to-doors? And even right here, I see a lot of them. And where are these white people that we believe that are living in our ideas? To the ANC, first, I would like to compliment the ANC on adopting a decision for government to support, or maybe to support local suppliers in terms of 75% procurement. I would like to compliment that. And now, in Gauteng, the problem that is always mentioned, by a lot of people, they're saying e-tolls. I want to understand clearly, these e-tolls, how do they support infrastructural development in Gauteng? Let us not focus our idea to the minor issue of e-tolls. I mean, I'm aware that in Gauteng, it's the only city.
Okay, you've asked your question. And
okay, thank you.
I have literally 3 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Your question, sir?
Okay, my name is Tsarolo Mahloko. I think first I would love to comment on the ANC's what they've shared with us. I think it's very disappointing for me in my youthful state and also as a student to find the ANC pre-1994 actually priding themselves with the legacy of apartheid of 6 universities and FET colleges built under the apartheid government in itself. And again, in going forth from that, I think my question is directed to Comrade Comrade Dalimpofu, in specific in his capacity as government in waiting, is to say that this is actually, the elections currently are actually contested based on a generational breakthrough of youth who are faced with unemployment, high debts in themselves, and also those of dropout rates and unemployment. How, as EFF, are you going to ensure that you relieve the debts of students created by the ANC government with the student loans, of which we as students who are currently having debts that are even more than those of our parents in ourselves?
Ngos. All right. Remember, you are answering questions and making your closing statements as briefly as possible, please. Brian, I'll start with you.
First point, indeed, the target set by the ANC-led government of ensuring that 75% of all goods and services procured by the state must be procured locally is a deliberate and intentional intervention to stimulate manufacturing. Example, the buses, the rear via that we are rolling out in the 3 metros, those buses are assembled here in Germiston. Again, the locomotives that PRASA is procuring, they're being assembled here in South Africa. So we are creating more skills, more jobs, and we ensure that the local economy grows. So it's something that we are implementing, is not just a dream. Number 2, the issue of e-tolls. The issue of e-tolls has not been properly framed. The debate is not whether or not we need to improve our freeways. The debate is which is the best mechanism of financing it. The DA and EFF are saying fuel levy, meaning anybody, including in Mvaba, who puts in petrol, must pay for the roads that are used by the people in Gauteng. From where our government stays, as its position, is that we'd rather have the user pay option. But we are very sensitive to the fact that the majority of the people who are poor, because in South Africa we don't have public transport as yet. We have a commuter-based transport, which takes Africans from dormitories to wide residential industrial areas. So what we are saying basically is that we need to put public transport in place. Even as we speak now, public transport like taxis, buses are exempted from paying e-tolls. People who are affected, of course, is us. And whether we like it or not, those who have cars 1 by 1 in these 4x4s, you use the road, you pay. But the issue is the alternative routes if you are not happy with e-tolls. And that's the position.
All right.
When I listened to Brian, I realized that there is some form of planning but very limited delivery. This whole idea that we will one day is still, I hope people of South Africa and Gauteng don't wait until one day. People are unemployed today, they need jobs now, and we need to get a government in place that can deliver work. What is vital here is the question about the door-to-door, and I find that question always disturbing. That there are South Africans who, for the purpose of their own, whatever political ideology, want to mobilize South Africans on the basis of race. If I was to sit here and do an audit and say, okay, I went to a door-to-door in Alex, there were 5 blacks, there were 3 whites, would it satisfy? Should I produce a register every time I have a march to say, there are so many blacks, there are so many whites? The tragedy behind that issue is the fact that it would be precisely what Hendrik Verwoerd would have been proud of. He would have been very, very proud. He would have been like, finally, the ANC understands the fact that we can split people on the basis of race and mobilize them on that score. Now, on the issue of e-tolls, and I think it's vital because I only raise it in as far as, in fact, my closing argument. You can't be hypocritical and say we want the user pay principles. In fact, my text here supports the education of the person in Kofimva. It's a fact. It's a taxation model that we've designed. So don't user pay and be hypocritical in certain instances. We argue for the fuel levy because tolling will destroy people's ability to create work. The fact of the matter is that when I go to Tembisa, I speak to a small business owner, he gets up, he says, I have a choice. Do I hire somebody or do I finance this tolling? The debate, I agree with Brian, it's not about rolling out infrastructure. It's about creating infrastructure that can create jobs. And my argument is that in financing it through tolling, you are destroying jobs. And my final closing thing is that this province is the economic output. We should roll out more infrastructure. We should allow small businesses to thrive. We must make sure without fail that people can be hired. That's why we say we are together for change and together for jobs.
Darling?
Yeah, look, I wish the people of Gauteng could eat these slogans, you know. Jobs are not created by slogans. Let me explain to you just 2 or 3 things, Siki. Firstly, I think I should give Brian, who says he's the head of political education.
Yeah.
I'll give him a quick lesson in Economics 101. Yeah. In our political education classes, we have something called Train the Trainer, so I'm going to train him. Yeah. You see, if you are going to create jobs, you can only create jobs by growing an economy. Full stop. The question is then, how do you grow an economy? The ANC has failed to grow the economy, so the ANC must go. How you grow the economy is very simple. You grow the economy by creating demands for goods and services. Because the goods and services, and that's why I left, because you failed, yeah. So the way you create jobs is by expanding the economy and expanding the demand side. Because a job is someone manufacturing something. So if there's no demand for those things, then they're not going to be jobs. It's as simple as all that. That is why the EFF has a policy on minimum wages. Because only by putting money in people's pockets will they stimulate the economy by spending in that economy. It's very simple, Brian. But after this, I'll give you a more... But the worst thing about the ANC, what he just said now, betrays exactly the fundamental problem. He boasts about the growth of the middle class. You cannot have a solution in South Africa that is led by growth of the middle class. Your focus must be on the under classes, as it were, because it's not going to magically fall from that middle class that is growing to the poorest of the poor. That is why, just as apartheid was a system of exclusion of black people, this current system that the ANC has put is a system of exclusion of poor people. Okay. So you cannot exclude people like that. But to the question about student loans, very simple. Thank you to the fighter who asked that question. It's very simple. You will not have to grapple with the debts of NSFAS and so on. The EFF says in one of its cardinal pillars, there shall be free quality education until the first degree. So NSFAS will be abolished.
Okay. Final comments, and be brief, please, Chris.
Thank you very much. Let me first tell you, Siki, how mortified I am that nobody said where UJ sits in the polls. But that's okay. We'll get over that. Yeah. Let me conclude by just making 3 brief observations. Mindful of the fact that this is a debate that was supposed to be about Gauteng. It turned out to be about the Western Cape as well, for interesting reasons. But for those who have predicted the death knell of the ANC in this province, I wish to suggest that the ramifications for both the ANC and the DA, if they don't do well in this province, this is the barometer, right? The consequences are going to be grave, particularly for the leadership of those parties, including the DA, I say. Yeah. But finally, I just want to say that for me, there is a disconnect between the politics that's going on amongst political parties and political leaders and what's happening in reality on the ground. So I conclude on this somber note. This is a country that sits on a social time bomb. And there is a there's another fascinating concept, youth bulge that's taking place. I think we South Africans should be very, very concerned that we are now called the protest capital of the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of you. And thank you very much for restraining yourselves until right at the end. I thank you. Let's go to Gauteng.